The sun rose over the golden sands of Egypt, and the desert stretched as far as the eye could see. To many, it was a place of emptiness, a land of scorching heat and endless dunes. But to Thomas, the historian, it was a place full of secrets, waiting to be found. He had spent years studying old manuscripts in libraries of Europe, tracing clues left behind by forgotten writers. Each paper, each story, each rumor pointed toward the same mystery, a hidden chamber buried deep within them. Desert. Thomas was not a man of great wealth, but his hunger for knowledge was stronger than any fortune. He dreamed of discovering something no one had seen for thousands of years. To him, history was alive, and the sands were like a book waiting to be opened. His friends often warned him that the desert could take his life, but Thomas believed that true history required courage. For this journey, Thomas had chosen his companions with care. Miriam, a young woman with a sharp mind and steady hands, carried maps she had drawn after months of study. She could read ancient symbols and follow star patterns in the night sky. Many had doubted her skills because she was young, but Thomas trusted her more than anyone. Her calm voice and clear thinking made her the perfect partner for such a dangerous mission. The third member of the team was Omar, a local guide who knew the desert better than anyone else. His family had lived near the river valley for generations. He could read the wind, track the movement of sand, and find water in places that seemed dry. His knowledge was not written in books, but passed down from his father and grandfather. To Omar, the desert was alive, and he respected its power. Though he was loyal, he also carried fear in his heart, for he had heard stories of cursed places where no man should go. On the morning of their departure, the three stood near the edge of the river, where the green fields ended and the desert began. Their camels were packed with water jars, ropes, chisels, lanterns, and food. Thomas looked across the wide sands with eyes full of determination. Miriam studied her maps one more time, making sure each line matched the stars she had observed. At night, Omar adjusted the saddles and checked the sky. "The desert will test you," Omar warned. "It takes the weak and leaves nothing behind. You must respect it." Thomas smiled, though his face was pale from the heat already rising. "I respect it," he said firmly, "but I believe it hides what we must find." With that, their journey began. The camels moved slowly, their feet sinking into the soft sand, while the travelers covered their heads with cloth to block the burning sun. The hours stretched into days. During the day, the heat was merciless. At night, the cold was sharp and biting. Still, Thomas pressed forward with endless energy. He spoke often about the chamber, how it could change the way people understood history, how it might reveal truths of rulers long forgotten. Miriam walked in silence much of the time, her eyes moving between the dunes and her maps. She was careful not to waste water and reminded Thomas to rest often. She admired his passion, but feared it might drive him to ignore danger. Omar led the way, always scanning the horizon. He pointed out old caravan paths, dry wells, and stones, marked by travelers long gone. His voice was calm but carried weight. After a week of travel, they reached a place where the dunes rose higher than mountains. The sand moved like waves, shaped by the wind, and each step forward felt like climbing a hill. Here, Miriam found the first sign that their journey was not in vain. At the base of a half-buried dune, she noticed pieces of stone sticking out. From the sand, she brushed them clean with her hands and revealed faint carvings. "These are old symbols," she whispered, her eyes shining. "They speak of a sealed chamber." Thomas knelt beside her, his hands trembling with excitement. He traced the shapes with his fingers, as if touching the past itself. The symbols were worn, but they carried a message, a warning, a seal, a promise that what lay beneath was meant to remain hidden. Omar frowned deeply when he saw them. "This is not a good place," he said firmly. "My grandfather told me of such marks. They are not signs of welcome. They are signs of danger." Thomas stood up, brushing sand from his clothes. His voice was steady. "Every discovery is born from danger, Omar. If men feared too much, the world would never move forward." Miriam looked between them, her face caught between hope and caution. "We must be careful," she said. These signs are not here without reason, but they also mean we are close. They camped near the carved stones that night. The air was heavy with silence. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows on their faces. Thomas wrote in his journal, recording every detail of the discovery. Miriam studied her maps again and again, aligning the carvings with her drawings. Omar sat apart from them, staring into the darkness beyond the fire. His hand rested on the sand as if he was listening to the earth. "Something sleeps here," he said quietly, almost to himself, "and it does not want to be woken." Thomas closed his journal and looked at him. "Then we must be the ones to wake it," he replied. His voice carried both excitement and defiance. As the fire burned low, Miriam wrapped herself in a blanket and looked up at the stars. She thought about the rulers who had once commanded armies, built temples, and carved their names into stone. She wondered why one would wish to hide a chamber so carefully, sealing it away in the heart of the desert. Questions filled her mind, questions that made her both eager and uneasy. By morning, the wind carried a strange stillness, as if the desert itself was waiting. The explorers rose with the sun, packed their supplies, and prepared to search for the hidden entrance. Their journey was far from over. They had touched the first page of the desert's secret book, but the rest of the story was yet to be revealed. And so, with hope burning in their hearts and shadows of fear behind their steps, they moved deeper into the desert, toward the chamber that had waited in silence for centuries. The desert morning was silent except for the steady steps of the camels. The sun had only just risen, but already the heat pressed down on the travelers like a heavy hand. Thomas led the way with eager eyes, carrying his notebook close to his chest. Miriam rode beside him, holding her rolled maps tightly. Omar walked ahead, guiding the camels with sure steps, his head covered to shield him from the fierce light. The carvings they had found the day before had filled Thomas with unstoppable energy. He spoke quickly, his words full of excitement. "Do you see what this means? These stones were not placed by nature. They were cut, shaped, and buried on purpose. Somewhere beneath these dunes lies the truth. The chamber is real." Miriam listened but said little. Her eyes studied the sand around them. Every curve of the dune, every line in the wind's path seemed to carry meaning. She had grown used to Thomas's passion, but she also felt the weight of Omar's silence. Their guide's warnings echoed in her mind. Still, she understood Thomas's desire. If history was a puzzle, they had just found one of its missing pieces. Omar finally stopped and raised his hand. The camels slowed, and Thomas frowned. "Why do we stop?" "We must keep moving. There are patterns here," Omar said calmly. He pointed at the ground, where the sand dipped into strange shapes. "The wind does not make this on its own. The earth is soft above something hollow." Thomas jumped down from his camel and dropped at his knees. He brushed the sand away with his hands, revealing more stone beneath the surface. Faint lines carved into the rock appeared, zigzagging like snakes. They were old, so old that the edges had been eaten by time. Miriam bent beside him, tracing the carvings with careful fingers. "These are not decorations. They are warnings." Thomas leaned closer. Warnings or directions, perhaps both. His eyes shone as if he had found treasure already. Omar shook his head. "The old kings were clever. They built their chambers with traps to keep strangers away. These marks could be signs of danger. If we keep digging, we may not find treasure. We may find death." But Thomas would not listen. He pulled a small brush and a pick from his bag and began to clear the surface. Sand poured away slowly, revealing more symbols. Miriam, despite her caution, helped him. She copied each design carefully into her map, her hand steady though her heart was uncertain. Omar stood apart, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting the desert itself to rise against them. By noon, they had uncovered a flat slab of stone almost as wide as a doorway. The markings around its edge showed men bowing before a figure seated on a throne. Above the throne, lines of symbols spoke of power and fear. Miriam read aloud what she could. It says, "Here rests the one who trusted no man. His throne lies. In silence, his secrets remain with him." Thomas's voice was full of wonder. "Do you hear that? Secrets? Not only a burial, but writings, objects, knowledge." This ruler sealed himself away not for death alone, but for what he wished to protect. "We must see it." Omar's voice was low and firm. "No man hides knowledge without reason. If he sealed it, he wished it never to be opened." Miriam looked between them. Her eyes were uncertain, but her curiosity burned. "If this is true, then we may be standing at the entrance to one of the greatest finds of our time. We cannot leave without knowing." They worked until the sun began to fall. The desert sky turned red, then purple. At last, the top of the slab was clear. Thomas pressed his hands against it. The stone was cold, far colder than the sand around it. A chill ran through his arms. He pulled back for a moment, then laughed softly to himself. "It feels as if the chamber itself breathes." That night they made camp beside the half-buried doorway. The firelight danced against the stone, making the carvings seem alive. Thomas wrote page after page in his journal, his eyes glowing with thoughts of discovery. Miriam lay on her blanket, gazing at the stars. She wondered about the man who had ordered this chamber sealed. Was he a cruel king, hated by his people, or was he a man so fearful of his secrets that he buried them with himself? Omar did not sleep. He sat by the fire, watching the flames, his mind filled with the stories his grandfather had told him when he was a boy. Stories of kings who called upon powers they could not control, who paid with their lives. The desert, he believed, had a memory. It punished those who disturbed what was meant to rest. In the middle of the night, a strange sound carried on the wind. It was not the cry of a jackal or the whisper of shifting sand. It was a low hum, deep and steady, like the breath of the earth itself. Miriam woke and sat up quickly, clutching her blanket. Thomas stirred and looked around in confusion. Omar's eyes were already open. "You hear it too," Omar said. Thomas frowned. "It is nothing, only the wind." But Miriam shook her head. "No, the wind is no rhythm. This sound is different. It comes from below." They sat in silence, listening. The hum rose and fell, soft but endless. At last, the sound faded, leaving only the emptiness of the night. Miriam shivered. Omar looked at Thomas with steady eyes. "This is a warning," Omar said. "The desert has spoken. We should turn back." Thomas tightened his grip on his journal. His face was pale, but his voice was strong. "No, this proves we are close. The chamber is waiting for us. We will not stop." Now, by dawn, the hum was gone, but the memory of it stayed with them. The travelers packed their things in silence. Miriam held her maps close, and Omar led the camels with slow steps. Thomas walked ahead with a fire in his eyes. He had no intention of turning back. The signs in the sand had revealed more than stone and carvings. They had revealed a door between the world of the living and the secrets of the past. Whether it was a door of knowledge or a door of danger, none of them yet knew. But each step forward pulled them closer to the truth hidden beneath the desert's skin. The desert sun burned above them, but Thomas barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the wide stone slab they had uncovered. The symbols carved into its surface seemed alive in the shifting light, telling stories of kings, betrayals, and sealed secrets. To him, this was not just a doorway, but a voice from the past calling out to be heard. Miriam wiped sweat from her forehead and studied the markings with calm care. Her fingers followed the lines as if tracing a path. She whispered to herself as she read, testing each symbol against her memory. Some of the carvings spoke of riches, others of warnings, but one line stood out more than any other. "It says the chamber was sealed by command of the ruler himself," she explained. "Not to protect his body, but to protect what he left behind. He wished no one to enter." Omar's voice was steady, though his eyes carried unease. "Then why do you try to enter? A king's wish is no small thing. If he sealed this place, it was for a reason. What rests inside does not want to be touched." Thomas knelt before the slab, his hand pressed against the cool stone. "History does not belong to the dead, Omar. It belongs to the living. If this chamber holds knowledge, then the world must see it." The wind blew across the dunes, carrying fine grains of sand against their faces. The desert seemed to sigh as if listening to their words. Omar turned his gaze toward the horizon, but he said no more. He knew Thomas's mind was set, and no warning would move him now. They worked together through the day, clearing the last of the sand from around the doorway. Using ropes, chisels, and small hammers, they struck at the edges of the slab. The stone groaned but did not give way. Miriam suggested they try to find a weak point. She studied the base of the slab and noticed faint cracks running along one corner. "Here," she said, pointing. "The builders may have sealed it with pressure. If we place the tools here, the stone may shift." Thomas's eyes lit up with hope. Together, they drove the chisels into the cracks and struck with steady rhythm. The sound of iron against stone echoed through the desert. Sweat ran down their backs. But they did not stop. Hours passed until at last a deep grinding sound filled the air. The slab began to move, slowly. Painfully, it shifted forward, leaving a thin line of darkness behind it. A wave of cold air escaped from the gap, brushing against their skin. Miriam gasped. The air smelled ancient, dry yet strangely heavy. Omar stepped back at once, his face pale. "The desert does not breathe like this," he said firmly. "This air has slept for centuries. You should not wake it." But Thomas was trembling with excitement. His voice shook as he whispered, "We have found it. The chamber is here." With ropes tied around the slab, they pulled together, straining with all their strength. The stone slid little by little until the opening was wide enough to reveal a passage. Beyond lay darkness, thick and endless, broken only by the faint reflection of their torchlight. They lit their lanterns and held them high. The light reached only a short distance, but it was enough to see the walls of the passage descending into the earth. Carvings stretched along the stone, their colors faded but still clear enough to tell a story. Figures of soldiers marched in rows, kneeling before a tall man with a crown. Around him were images of chains, fire, and strange objects that none of them recognized. Miriam's voice was low. This was no ordinary ruler. He wanted to be feared even in death. Thomas's face shone with wonder, which makes his secrets all the more valuable. Omar stood at the entrance, his hand gripping the rope tightly. He did not step inside. Instead, he muttered prayers under his breath. He felt the weight of the chamber pressing out against him, as if the walls themselves carried anger. Thomas raised his lantern higher and took the first step down into the passage. His boots echoed against the stone floor. Miriam followed, her eyes moving across the walls, recording each detail in her notebook. The air grew colder with every step, and the silence deepened. Only Omar remained outside, his shadow long against the sand. Inside, the passage sloped downward. Dust rose in clouds as they moved, clinging to their clothes and burning their throats. The carvings changed as they descended. At first, they showed the ruler as a powerful king, his enemies kneeling at his feet. But further along, the images darkened. The figures showed pain, shadows, and symbols Miriam struggled to understand. "These are warnings," she said quietly. "They tell of betrayal, of things taken too far." He was not just a king. He was something else. Thomas touched the carvings with his fingertips, ignoring the unease in Miriam's voice. All rulers are remembered by their deeds. Perhaps he wished to be remembered as more than a man. At the bottom of the passage, the air grew still. Before them stood another doorway, this one smaller, its frame carved with spirals and eyes that seemed to follow them in the light. Thomas stepped forward and placed his hand upon it. The stone was so cold it felt alive beneath his skin. "We have reached the chamber," he said softly. Almost reverently. Miriam looked at him with worry. "Should we not wait? We need to study these markings more carefully. This door may not be meant to open." Thomas shook his head. "We cannot turn back now. This is the moment we have sought. To hesitate would be to waste everything." He pressed his shoulder against the stone and pushed, grunting with effort. The door did not move. Miriam joined him, and together they strained until, with a heavy sound, the stone shifted inward. Dust poured out, clouding the air, and the cold grew sharper. When the dust cleared, their lanterns lit a vast chamber beyond. Black stone pillars rose high to hold the ceiling. At the center stood a coffin of dark stone, surrounded by objects, sealed in jars and metal tools unlike anything Thomas had seen before. The chamber felt both magnificent and dreadful, a place built not only for rest but for warning. Thomas stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. "We have done it. We stand where no man has stood for centuries." Miriam held her lantern tightly, her heart pounding. She could not shake the feeling that the eyes carved into the doorway still watched them. Omar, still standing at the entrance above, felt the cold air brush against his face and knew the moment had come. The explorers had opened the hidden door, and with it, they had awakened something that had waited in silence. The lantern flames trembled in the heavy air of the chamber. Dust hung like a veil, and every sound echoed as though the stone walls themselves were alive. Thomas stood at the front, his eyes fixed on the coffin that rested on a raised platform. The coffin was carved from black stone, smooth and shining even after centuries. Strange patterns covered its surface, curling in shapes that neither Thomas nor Miriam could understand. Miriam moved carefully, her light sweeping across the room. Round the coffin lay sealed jars with golden tops, chests bound in bronze, and tools of metal that looked far more advanced than she had ever seen in any museum. Their shapes were sharp and precise, as if crafted with knowledge lost to time. Her breath caught in her throat. "This chamber," she whispered, "it is not only a tomb, it is something more. These objects do not belong to any age we know." Thomas knelt beside one of the jars. The seal was unbroken, the wax still firm after centuries of silence. He touched it gently, almost reverently. This ruler wanted these things to be remembered. He wished them to outlive him. No. Omar's voice came from the doorway above, where he still stood. His face was shadowed by the lantern light. He wanted them hidden. "There's a difference." The cold inside the chamber was sharp enough to make Miriam shiver. She looked again at the carvings on the walls. The paintings were faded, yet their meaning was clear. They showed soldiers bowing, chains around their wrists. They showed the crowned ruler standing above them with one hand raised as if commanding powers unseen. And then came darker images, fires burning, figures twisted in pain, symbols drawn in red. "These are not triumphs," she said, her voice low. "These are warnings. Whoever rests here was not only feared but hated." Thomas shook his head. His eyes burned with determination. "History is not written by the fearful, Miriam. If this ruler sought something greater, then it is our duty to uncover it. The world deserves to know." He stepped onto the platform where the coffin lay. His hands ran across the stone lid. The patterns were cold beneath his skin, yet his excitement only grew. Miriam climbed up beside him, though her steps were hesitant. Omar refused to move from the doorway, his hand gripping the rope as though it was his last tie to safety. "Do not open it," Omar warned. "You will bring misfortune upon all of us." Thomas ignored him. He placed the edge of his chisel against the crack between the coffin lid and base, with each strike of his hammer. The sound rang through the chamber like thunder. Dust fell from the ceiling. Miriam flinched at every blow, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to shift on the walls. At last, the lid gave a low groan. The sound was so deep it made their chests shake. Thomas pressed his hands against it, and Miriam, despite her fear, helped him. Together they pushed, and the lid slid open with a long, heavy scrape. Cold air rushed out, colder than the desert night, chilling their skin. Inside the coffin was no preserved body wrapped in linen, no treasure of gold or jewels. Instead, scrolls lay stacked in bundles, their edges blackened as if burned. Beside them were stone tablets etched with markings Miriam had never seen before. They glowed faintly in the lantern light, giving off a strange shimmer. Thomas's voice trembled with awe. "Do you see? This is no ordinary burial. These are records, writings, perhaps experiments." He was not a ruler of gold, but of knowledge. Miriam lifted one of the scrolls carefully. The writing was in an ancient hand, harsh and hurried. She could not understand all of it, but the pieces she did chilled her. "It speaks of powers that should not be touched. It tells of attempts to call upon forces greater than man. And it says he failed." Omar's voice echoed from the doorway. "This is why he sealed himself away. He knew his sins, and he buried them with him Leave it. Leave all of it. But Thomas's eyes burned brighter than ever. He picked up one of the tablets, staring at the strange glowing marks. This could change everything we know about history. It proves that there were men who reached beyond the limits of their time. We must take this back. Miriam set the scroll down gently, her hands shaking. The words she had read still echoed in her mind, warnings of danger, warnings of a price to pay. She looked around the chamber again. The walls, the pillars, the objects, everything seemed to watch her, as if the chamber itself was alive and displeased by their presence. The lantern flames flickered suddenly. Though there was no wind, the shadows stretched long and strange. Across the walls, Omar gripped the rope tighter, his voice sharp. The chamber is awake. Do you not feel it? It does not want you here. Miriam's heart pounded. For the first time, even Thomas faltered. He turned slowly, looking at the carvings again, the faces painted in pain, the eyes wide with terror. The silence of the chamber seemed heavier now, pressing against his ears. Still, he refused to back away. He placed the tablet into his bag and closed the coffin with shaking hands. We cannot leave empty-handed. This is history. The world must see it. The three of them left the chamber slowly, their lanterns casting dim light against the long passage. As they climbed upward, the air grew warmer, but the weight of the chamber followed them. Omar was the last to leave, and as he stepped into the open desert night, he turned back once more. The darkness of the chamber seemed alive, and the faint hum from before returned for a brief moment. Rising and falling like a breath, they sealed the entrance as best they could with sand. Though Thomas kept his bag close, guarding the tablet he had taken, Miriam wrote quickly in her journal, her face pale, her hands unsteady. Omar stood apart, staring into the dunes with eyes full of worry. The chamber had been opened, and though its door was closed again, something had changed. The silence of the desert no longer felt the same. It carried a weight, a memory, a warning that could not be erased. The explorers sat by their campfire in silence that night. Thomas wrote with furious energy, convinced he had uncovered a treasure greater than gold. Miriam read her notes again and again, unable to shake the warnings. She had translated, and Omar prayed in the quiet, knowing the chamber was not empty. It had awakened. The fire crackled weakly in the desert night, but its warmth did little to chase away the chill that clung to them after leaving the chamber. Thomas sat close to the flames, his journal open across his knees. He wrote page after page, sketching the glowing tablet he had taken and copying the markings as best as he could. His hand moved quickly, almost feverishly, as if he feared the words might vanish if he waited too long. Miriam sat opposite him, her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She held one of her own journals open, filled with careful notes. But unlike Thomas, her writing slowed often. Her eyes wandered to the fire, then to the dunes around them, as if she expected shadows to move. The warnings carved in the walls of the chamber still echoed in her mind. Omar sat apart, his back to the fire, watching the darkness. His eyes never left the horizon. He had said little since they closed the chamber's door, but his silence was heavy with meaning. At last Miriam broke the silence. Thomas, you cannot ignore what we read. Those scrolls were not stories of victory. They were confessions. That ruler was afraid of what he had done. He sealed himself away because he knew his knowledge was dangerous. Thomas did not look up. His pencil scratched quickly across the page. Dangerous or not, it is knowledge. History is built on men who dared to look where others feared. If he experimented with things beyond his age, then that is all the more reason to study it. Omar's voice was sharp though quiet. And if his experiments were a curse, if they bring harm to those who follow, Thomas closed his journal at last and looked at them both. The firelight reflected in his eyes, making them shine. Do you truly think we should leave this behind? That we should walk away and let the sands bury it forever? Think of what the world could learn. Think of the discoveries that could change the future. Miriam's hands tightened around her blanket. She admired Thomas's passion, but fear pulled at her heart. There's a difference between discovery and danger. Those carvings showed chains, fire, and suffering. The scrolls warned of failures. He was not trying to protect the world's knowledge. He was trying to protect the world from himself. Omar nodded firmly, and still he took from him, "That tablet does not belong to us. The dessert gave warnings, and you did not listen?" Thomas sighed, rubbing his temple. "You call them warnings. I call them fear. Superstitions passed down. Through time, every great discovery has been guarded by fear. But we are not the kind to turn back." The night grew colder, and the desert winds shifted. The fire flickered, throwing strange shadows across the sand. Miriam closed her journal and looked up at the stars. "Then promise me, Thomas. Promise me you will not use what we found blindly. If you carry these writings into the world, do so with caution. Do not let pride guide you." Thomas's expression softened for a moment. He reached across the fire and placed his hand over hers. "I promise I will treat it with care. But Miriam, this is too great to keep hidden. It is meant to be shared." Omar rose and walked a short distance away, standing at the edge of the camp where the dunes began. The desert stretched into darkness, endless and quiet, but he felt the weight of unseen eyes. He whispered to himself the words his grandfather once spoke, "The sands remember. They keep what is buried for a reason." The next morning, the three prepared to move. The sandstorm of the night before had left small ridges across the dunes. The camels groaned as Omar loaded the supplies, but he noticed that the animals were restless. Their heads turned toward the place where the chamber had been opened, their movements uneasy. "They feel it too," he said quietly. "The desert. Creatures no more than men." Thomas brushed off the words. He tied the bag carrying the glowing tablet tightly to his camel. Miriam walked slowly, her face pale from lack of sleep. She had dreamt of the ruler's painted eyes staring at her from the walls, following her every step. The dream had felt too real, as though the chamber's silence had followed her into the night. As they continued their journey, Miriam rode beside Thomas. She opened her notes again and pointed at the drawings she had copied from the scrolls. "Look here. These symbols repeat. They appear again and again beside the words for failure and ruin." Whatever he attempted, it consumed him. Thomas glanced at the page but only smiled faintly, and still he left the records behind. If he truly wished to erase them, he could have destroyed them instead. He preserved them in stone and scroll. He wanted someone to find them, someone worthy. Miriam shook her head. Or perhaps he could not bring himself to destroy them, even though he knew they were dangerous. Pride is strong. Even kings cannot escape it. Omar, walking ahead, called back to them. "Pride built kingdoms, and pride destroyed them. Do not let it destroy you as well." The days passed slowly. The desert grew harsher, as if the land itself had changed after they opened the chamber. The heat was sharper, the nights colder. Water was harder to find, and even Omar seemed uneasy as he led the way. Miriam wrote less in her journal. Thomas wrote more. His excitement did not fade, though his face grew weary from lack of rest. He studied the markings on the tablet every night by firelight, tracing them with his fingers, whispering thoughts under his breath as though speaking to the past itself. One evening, Miriam approached him while Omar prepared food. "Thomas, I must tell you something," she said softly. She pulled out her notebook and pointed at her translations. "I believe I know why the ruler sealed himself away. The writings speak of voices, not voices of men, but voices from beyond. He tried to command them, but they turned against him. They drove him to madness." Thomas looked up at her, his face pale in the firelight. For a moment his excitement faltered, replaced by doubt. "Voices, yes," Miriam said. "And he wrote that they must never be awakened again. He feared others might follow his path, so he sealed himself with the knowledge." Omar placed the food beside them and listened in silence. Then he spoke in his steady tone. "And yet here we are, carrying the very things he wished to bury." Thomas pressed his hand against the bag that held the tablet. His heart raced with conflict. Part of him wanted to believe Miriam's warning. Part of him refused to let go of the chance to reveal something extraordinary. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. Perhaps he was mad, or perhaps he stood on the edge of something greater. "Until I understand, I cannot let it go." The fire burned low, and the desert night deepened, Miriam lay awake, staring at the stars, wondering if their journey had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Omar prayed again, his words lost in the wind. And Thomas, though his eyes closed in sleep, kept one hand resting on his bag, guarding the secret that was slowly changing him. The chamber had given them its warnings, carved into stone and written on scrolls, but the question remained whether they would listen or whether history would repeat the mistakes of the past. The desert seemed endless, yet their journey pressed forward. The sun rose each day, burning against the dunes, while nights fell cold and silent. Miriam often looked at the horizon with weary eyes, but her thoughts were not on the sand or the heat. Her mind was still trapped in the chamber, hearing the warnings carved into the walls. Omar walked ahead with steady steps, guiding the camels with a patience born of years in the desert. And Thomas, though his body grew thin and tired, carried a restless energy that never left him. Each night when they stopped, Thomas pulled out the glowing tablet. He set it near the fire, its faint light mixing with the flames. He studied it for hours, tracing each symbol, whispering their shapes, trying to match them with the words Miriam had translated. His journals filled with sketches, lines of writing, and questions that only seemed to multiply. On the seventh night since leaving the chamber, Thomas finally called Miriam and Omar closer. "I think I have unlocked part of it," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. He pointed to a series of repeating markings on the tablet. "These are not names or titles. They are instructions. And this," he tapped the glowing lines, "is a sequence, a pattern that shows how something was done." Miriam leaned closer, her face pale in the shifting firelight. "A pattern for what?" Thomas's eyes gleamed. "For the voices. The king wrote that he summoned them, but he failed to control them. This tablet describes how he tried. These markings are not only words, they are steps." Omar frowned deeply, shaking his head. "You speak of summoning what should remain buried. This is not wisdom, it is danger." But Thomas could not be turned. "Don't you see? This is the answer to why he sealed himself away. He feared no one else would learn what he had discovered. Yet here it is before us. If we can understand it, we can finish what he began." Miriam's hands tightened around her blanket. "Finish what he began. Thomas, he failed. He destroyed his own people. The scrolls were warnings, not lessons. Do you not understand?" Thomas rose to his feet, holding the tablet high so the glow lit his face. "Knowledge is never a curse unless men choose to misuse it. I will not misuse it. I will study it, learn it, and reveal it to the world. Imagine a voice from beyond, a power greater than any empire. What if it can heal? What if it can teach us truths hidden for ages?" Omar stood also, his shadow long against the sand. "And what if it destroys us, as it destroyed him? You chase hope where you should see danger." The fire snapped, sending sparks into the air. Miriam stepped between them before the argument could grow. "Enough! We cannot fight among ourselves. But Thomas, I beg you at least wait until we reach the city before you attempt anything. Do not test it here in the open desert." Thomas's breath came quick, but after a long silence, he lowered the tablet and nodded. "Very well. I will wait, but once we return, I will not hide this discovery." The next days were heavy with tension. Miriam watched Thomas with worry, afraid of what his curiosity might push him to do. Omar grew more silent, his eyes scanning the horizon often, as though expecting something to appear. Even the camels moved slower, uneasy under the weight of their loads. On the 10th day, they reached a cluster of ruined pillars half buried in the sand. The remains of an old way station stood there, its broken stones offering a little shade. They chose to rest before the long journey across the next stretch of dunes. As they set up camp, Thomas sat apart with the tablet once more. The ruins around them seemed to stir something in him. The carvings reminded him of the chamber's walls, and the silence pressed on him until he could no longer resist. Miriam was preparing water when she noticed Thomas whispering again. She turned quickly, her heart racing, and saw him tracing the symbols on the tablet in order, one after another. The glow grew brighter under his hand. "Thomas, stop," she cried, rushing to him. "You promised to wait." But Thomas did not. "Look at her. His eyes were fixed on the tablet. His lips moved faster now, repeating the symbols aloud like a chant. Omar dropped the rope he had been tying and ran forward. "Foolish man, you will bring ruin upon us all." The tablet pulsed. Suddenly, its glow spilling across the sand. The air around them shivered, as though a storm had passed unseen. A low hum filled the ruins. Soft at first, then louder, echoing from the stones. The camels cried out in fear. Pulling at their ropes, Thomas's voice trembled but did not stop. "It's working. Do you hear it? The voices are answering." Miriam grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away. "Thomas, this is not discovery. This is danger. You must stop." But it was too late. The air above the tablet wavered, like heat rising from stone. And then a shape began to form. It was not clear, not solid, but a shifting figure of light and shadow. The sound grew into a chorus of whispers, countless voices, speaking at once in a language none of them understood. Thomas fell to his knees, his face pale but filled with wonder. "It's them, the voices of the beyond. They're real." Miriam's fear turned to dread. She remembered the carvings of chains and fire, the warnings of madness. She pulled at Thomas, but he would not move. His eyes were locked on the figure. "Omar, step forward," his voice firm. "Enough. You will not take him. You will not take us." He grabbed the edge of the tablet, but the glow burned his hands, forcing him back. The whispers grew louder, rising into a sharp cry that shook the stones. The figure above the tablet stretched tall, its form unstable, its light flickering like fire. Miriam covered her ears, tears in her eyes, but she still heard the words beneath the chaos. They were words of hunger, of calling, of reaching. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the glow faded. The whispers fell silent. The figure dissolved into the night air, leaving only the soft crackle of their fire. Thomas collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. His hands clutched the tablet, but the glow had dimmed to a faint shimmer. He looked up at Miriam and Omar with wide eyes. "Did you see? Did you hear? It is real." The king was right. "We have touched something greater than ourselves." Miriam knelt beside him, her face filled with fear and sorrow. "And you have also touched what destroyed him. Do you not see, Thomas? This is why he sealed it away. This is why he begged the world not to follow." Omar's hands were still trembling from the burn. He stared at the faint light of the tablet and spoke in a low voice. "We should have never opened that chamber. We should have never carried this out of the sand." The desert was quiet again, but it was no longer the same. They had revealed what was hidden. The voices had answered, and though they were gone for now, Miriam knew in her heart they would not remain silent forever. The warnings of the past were no longer just words carved in stone. They had become real, and the choice to listen or to ignore was now theirs alone. The desert stretched before them like a sea of gold, endless and unbroken. Miriam walked in silence, her eyes fixed on the horizon, but her thoughts weighed heavily on what had happened among the ruins. The voices had answered. They had risen out of the tablet like a storm of light and sound, and though they were gone now, their memory clung to her like a shadow that would not leave. Omar limped slightly, his burned hands wrapped in cloth. He had said little since the night of the summoning. His quietness was not only from pain but also from fear. For a man who had spent his life crossing deserts and guiding travelers, he knew the difference between natural danger and unnatural danger. What they had awakened was not of this world, and he could not shake the feeling that it was following them still, unseen but near. Thomas, however, walked with a strange energy. His steps were light, almost eager. His eyes shone whenever he glanced at the tablet hidden in his satchel. It was as if the voices had left him not with dread, but with hope. Miriam noticed the change in him, the way he no longer slept soundly, the way he muttered to himself while sketching symbols in his journal. He believed he had touched greatness, and that belief had taken root deeper than reason could reach. By the 14th day, they finally sighted the stone towers of the desert city. The sight should have brought relief, but for Miriam it brought only unease. Once Thomas entered the city, he would have scholars, nobles, and rulers eager to hear his discoveries. She feared he would not only share the tablet, but also try again to summon what they had seen that night, camped within sight of the city walls. Miriam sat beside the small fire while Thomas wrote in his journal. Omar rested near the camels, his eyes half closed but still watchful. Miriam broke the silence at last. "Thomas," she said softly, "promise me one thing. Do not speak of the tablet when we reach the city. Not yet. Give us time to think, to understand what we have truly found." Thomas looked up, his face lit by the fire and by something more. "Miriam, the world must know. We carry proof of voices beyond time. Do you not see what this means? The old king was not only a ruler of men. He touched something far greater. This is not a curse, it is an unfinished truth. And I will finish it." Omar opened his eyes, his voice sharp though weak. "You speak like a man blinded by light. The truth you seek will not give life. It will take it. That king left warnings for a reason. He gave his people a tomb instead of a kingdom. And if you share this, you will give the world the same fate." Thomas shook his head, clutching the journal. "Fear has blinded both of you. I have seen the beginning of what can be. If controlled, it could heal, guide, or protect. Perhaps even answer questions mankind has asked since the dawn of time." Miriam placed a hand on his arm. Her eyes shone not with anger, but with sorrow. "And if it cannot be controlled, what if the voices use us as tools? What if we are the ones being summoned, not them? Think, Thomas. Think before you give them power." For a long moment, Thomas said nothing. Then he pulled away gently, closing his journal. "I cannot turn back. Tomorrow, I will go to the scholars. They will help me unlock the rest." Miriam's heart sank. She saw no greed in his eyes, no cruelty, but a hunger that was just as dangerous. He believed, and belief could be sharper than any blade. The next morning they entered the city. Crowds moved through the streets, and the sound of markets, animals, and bells filled the air. Thomas looked at the tall houses and busy squares with the wonder of a man who carried a secret, too great for such noise and laughter. Miriam and Omar stayed close to him, as if their nearness could hold him back from what he planned. Within hours, word spread that a foreign scholar had returned with discoveries from the desert. Invitations came from men in fine robes, from scribes, from priests, from those who wished to hear his story. Thomas accepted eagerly. That evening, they stood in a great hall, its stone pillars lined with oil lamps. Dozens gathered to listen as Thomas placed the tablet on a carved table. Its glow drew gasps from the crowd. Murmurs filled the air as he began to speak of the chamber, the scrolls, the warnings, and at last, the voices. Miriam's heart pounded as he spoke, for she saw how the listeners leaned closer, hungry for wonder, blind to danger. Omar shifted uneasily, his hands clenched at his sides. When Thomas began to trace the symbols again, Miriam could bear it no longer. She stepped forward, her voice rising. "Listen to me. This is not knowledge to be used. This is a warning from a king who lost everything. We saw what happens when the voices are called. We saw their hunger. They are not saviors. They are chains." The crowd grew restless. Some whispered that she was afraid of progress. Others frowned. Torn between her plea and Thomas's brilliance, Thomas raised his hand for silence. His voice carried calm and strength. "Miriam speaks from fear, but I speak from hope. Fear has kept mankind in darkness for too long. Tonight, we choose light." He pressed his fingers to the glowing lines. The hall fell silent, the air thick with expectation. Miriam rushed forward, but Omar caught her arm, shaking his head. The tablet's glow spread across the hall, painting the pillars in pale fire. Once more, the whispers rose, at first soft, then louder, until the hall shook with countless voices. The crowd gasped, some covering their ears, others staring in awe. The same figure of shifting light appeared above the tablet, taller, clearer, its form almost human, but not. Miriam cried out, "Stop this before it is too late." But Thomas stood frozen, his eyes wide with wonder. The figure leaned forward, and though its voice was not of this world, every soul in the hall understood its words. "We are here. You have called. Now you belong to us." A cry rose from the crowd as lamps shattered and the air filled with a cold wind. The voices grew into a storm, and the figure stretched its arms as if to embrace the hall. People fled, but the doors slammed. Shut by unseen force, Thomas fell to his knees, still clutching the tablet. But now his face was filled not with triumph but with terror. Miriam broke free from Omar and ran to him, trying to pull the tablet away. "Let it go, Thomas. End it now." With trembling hands, Thomas at last released it. The tablet struck the floor, cracking down the center. Its glow burst outward in one final flash that shook the hall to its foundations. The voices screamed, then fell silent as the figure dissolved into smoke. When the light faded, the hall was in ruin. The tablet lay in pieces, its glow gone forever. The crowd, shaken and pale, stumbled out into the night, their all replaced. By fear, Thomas lay on the ground, weak and trembling. Miriam knelt beside him, her face wet with tears. "You see now, knowledge is not always meant to be taken. Some truths are prisons, not gifts." Thomas closed his eyes, whispering, "I thought I was leading us to light, but I opened the door to darkness." Omar helped them rise, his voice steady though heavy. "The price of discovery is sometimes the great. Let this be the last time." The voices are ever called. They left the ruined hall together, carrying no treasure, no triumph, only the memory of what had nearly broken them all. The tablet was gone, but its echo remained in their hearts. The desert had given them a secret, and they had paid the price to learn it. And though the city would remember the night of the voices for generations, Miriam, Omar, and Thomas knew the truth most clearly. Some chambers are sealed not to hide wonders, but to guard the world from them.